How did we get here? How did we get to this incredibly bleak, dystopian place in history? This future. How do we get here? Why are we here? And where are we going? You know, it's something I've written about a lot. And I want to take a second to try and talk about it. The way that we got here, right, is that our world system began to break down, all right? World system is a term from a famous European philosopher, Wallerstein, okay? And Wallerstein, a world system is kind of an economic configuration, okay? And if you've heard the words core and periphery when it comes to economics, that's a world system kind of frame, right? Now, what happened over the last, I don't know, 20, 30 years, longer than that, is that we had a world system that was kind of designed by America, right? And this world system was to be sort of hyper-capitalist, okay? And in this world system, America was to be the world's main consumer, and it still is, right? So America is something like 70 to 80% of the world's consumption, okay? That's a privilege of being the hegemon, or the guy that gets to design the world system, right? The hyperpower. And in this world system, there were a constellation of other major powers that were going to be the big producers for America's consumption, right? So it's China, India, okay? Those were the producers of physical capital, okay? So you can think of those guys as the factory floor, and America as the consumer, okay? Now, who was financing all of this? People think that it was Japan and China that have been financing American consumption. And that's sort of partially true. In fact, it is Europe that's been financing American consumption. So Europe is by far and away the largest investor in America. Okay? And when we say investment, we mean stocks, we mean bonds, we mean currency. Okay? Three big financial markets. So this was the design of the world system. And in some sense, you have heard the words, the post-World War II order, the Bretton Woods order. Okay, so this was kind of, sort of, the Bretton Woods order. And in its heyday, the Bretton Woods order, post-war order, right, was designed for very, very noble and beautiful things. Explicitly, by the way. An end to war, an end to hunger, an end to deprivation, an end to violence, international law, justice, okay? So, Bretton Woods, this is a conference at the end of World War II where you know, leaders got together and sort of took a stab at redesigning the world system. It's a very idealistic kind of thing, a noble thing. And I think it was a cool thing, right? It was beautiful accomplishment for leaders to sit down and say, we are going to angle, going to try to have a world without war, violence, hunger, deprivation, all right? And the point is not, I don't want you to get wrapped up in sort of like childish, you know, sophomore kind of left-wing criticism, which is say, well, they didn't succeed. Of course they didn't succeed, man. We're not like, nothing is perfect. Nobody's perfect. But make no mistake, that was the point of that design. So that's why we have institutions like the World Bank, like the IMF, like the United Nations, like the International Labor Organization, like the World Food Program. All of these things exist because of Bretton Woods. And their central point was to create a world which was more stable, which was more peaceful, which was more prosperous. And they were going to do that through the provision of what are known as global public goods. Okay? Global public goods. A public good is a thing that we all enjoy in common. All right, so global public goods are things like peace. Peace is a global public good. Things like rule of law, international rule of law. Okay, so it took, here's an interesting aside, the International Criminal Court in The Hague was only set up in the 90s. Okay, so it took almost half a century after the end of the last World War for that path of global goods to really evolve and grow, okay? So more global public goods, international cooperation, trade, international finance, the movement of people, all right? Now, you may sense that the reason I'm teaching you this is because all of that stuff is now going into reverse, all of it. International trade, international finance, the movement of people, international rule of law. That one's practically a joke at this point, right? I mean, Trump just kidnapped the head of a foreign state. You've seen the situation in Gaza, you know. So global public goods. sort of fracturing before our eyes. And that's what happens when a world system breaks down. Okay? Now, part of the reason that this world system broke down is because in America, right, the gains of this, it was the guy that created this world system. And it was the guy that benefited the most by a long way, benefited the most, right? A lot of the world's poor countries are still achingly poor, right? People live in desperate circumstances all around the world. Have their lives improved compared to 50 years ago, 100 years ago? Probably, yeah. On average, yes. But America benefited the most. The problem is what we all know to be true, which is that in America, the rich became ultra rich, became mega rich, became super rich, right? Astronomically up the chain. And today we have in America a system that you might as well call billionairism, right? Where billionaires control everything. And they're household names, right? Zuckerberg, Bezos, Trump, doesn't matter. The point is that the gains went to them. Okay? Sort of hyper-capitalism, right? And as the gains went to them, the average person grew incredibly frustrated, angry, embittered, just like in Weimar Germany. And America had a kind of fascist collapse, right? And I said kind of, but it's not really kind of, right? You have Gestapos on the streets and people being murdered and beaten and tortured and networks of concentration camps going up. So we have a repetition of the 1930s. But of course, that doesn't quite summarize it. Because at the same time, that system of billionairism in America produced these runaway forces, right, of incredible concentration of capital, the very top, and this sort of, it's hard to even describe, tech, right? The effect of tech on our lives is so pernicious. We're surrounded by it, right? Here's my phone. Oh, there's Snowy, by the way. There he is. Say hi to Snowy. I'm filming this on my laptop, right? So tech is also a major part of this collapse because every world system has its own set of technologies, right? You can think back to the Industrial Revolution or various forms of technologies that other civilizations were based on. In the American world system, the idea was that America's only real export was going to be tech. Okay? Now, let's come to now. So that's kind of how the world system that America designed failed, right? Huge concentrations of capital. The average person's life kind of fell apart. The middle class disappeared. Okay? And you had the resurgence of fascism, Weimar Germany to Nazi Germany style. So let's come to now. And in the middle of all this, you have all this technology, right? Disempowering people, taking away their agency, addicting them to right, garbage. And so people weren't able to resist, right? The possibility of any kind of revolution or change or transformation forestalled when everybody's glued to their screens in this hyper-narcissistic, infantile way, right? Give me my dopamine hit so I can feel better about the state of my crap life. Going nowhere, right? So you put all those things together, and that's kind of how the world system collapsed before our eyes. So let's come to now. What's happening now is very interesting. All right. So after Trump's re-election, right, Trump went bananas, right? And he proceeded to declare a trade war on the world. And he proceeded to try and take over Greenland or, call Canada the 51st state and whatnot. So what happened here is that the rest of the world, especially social democracies like Canada and Europe, began to come to their senses. Bang. And they realized something that they'd been brushing under the rug for too long, which is that American values are really antithetical to social democratic values. The West has called itself the West for a long time, and we kind of all know what that means, right? It's like the former colonial nations, white people, right? It's kind of what the West means, all right? And the truth is that vision of the West, because it's united by, right, history, right, empire, colonialism, blah, blah. There's a shared history there, maybe, okay? But it has hidden the fact that American values, or I'm not saying every American has these values, but I am saying these are the values of American society and the economy and the values Americans are made to live under, are very antithetical to those of social democracy. So what am I talking about? Well, you know it by now if you've ever lived overseas and you're American, right? So American life is super individualistic, it's super materialistic, it's hyper Darwinian, it's about money and power. And if you don't have enough money, you die. Bang, you're dead. You lose your job, you can lose your house, you can find yourself out on the street like that. It happens every day, right? So this individualism, materialism, kind of hyper narcissism of American life, right? And connect that back to the design of the world system. America was supposed to be the world's big consumer, right? 80% of the world's consumption happened in America. Narcissistic, right? Infantile narcissistic to think that we can build a prosperous economy or a society purely based on consumption. Yeah? So Europe is now beginning to realize that those modern American hyper-capitalist values, Darwinism, individualism, materialism, kind of short-termism, indifference, treating other people like means, not ends, instrumentalism, transactionalism, everything is a deal, nothing is permanent. They're very antithetical to social democratic values, which are much more communal, gentle, soft, caring, warm, kind. I spent most of my adult life in Europe, and it's true, right? You go to Italy and people are hugging on the streets all night long. You go to France and they're kissing each other on the streets, on the cheeks, all day long, right? So it's surreal, this warmth and this gentleness. As Europe wakes up to this fundamental difference in values, it is now beginning to fracture seriously from America. And the way that it's beginning to fracture is politically, economically, socially, culturally, and also, interestingly, technologically, right? And to me, that's a very interesting one because tech is America's only real export at this point. But now even Europe is beginning to say, look, we've had enough. We don't want to be part of this bleak dystopian future. So recently, Europe is kind of in the headlines for turning down a lot of America's spy surveillance tech, right? Carving out a very different relationship with not just technology, right? I don't want you to focus on the tech. I want you to focus on kind of what an economy is or what a way of life is, all right? So as Europe wakes up and it says, hey man, America's actually really different from us, very different. And maybe we can't be, maybe we can be sort of like neighbors in some sense, but can we ever be friends again, allies again? Can we depend on each other again? Probably not in the same way that it was before. So Europe is beginning to decouple, fracture, split itself off. And tech is a reflection of that. It's an important reflection, but it's a reflection of that. So I want you to understand that. So the world system is now reorganizing, all right? It's reorganizing very, very fast. You can see smart leaders in the world, Mark Carney in Canada, Macron in France, beginning to lead trade, a reconfiguration of international trade and international finance, all right? You can see smart leaders like Sanchez in Spain beginning to lead a reconfiguration of people, human flows, okay? So the world system is now reconfiguring. And I think what's going to happen very clearly now, Americans are obsessed with this idea that China is going to race ahead of them. Stupid. It's a stupid, guys, it's a stupid idea. China's per capita income is $10,000 a person. China is a relatively poor country, right? This China fear, Sinophobia, is a reflection of this old school American fear of the other. Okay? And you know what I'm talking about. I don't have to get into much detail about that. It's not China that America is already ceding global leadership to. It's right in front of us. It's Europe and Canada. They're going to form an axis of social democracy. And in that axis of social democracy, there's going to be stability, there's going to be prosperity, and more importantly, there's going to be the things that prosperity and stability are really based on, which is more equality, more equity, more sanity, more clear-headedness, better levels of education, better levels of thinking, okay? And I think it's almost a foregone conclusion now that the leadership of a civilization, which consists of things like science, art, literature, intellect, not just tech, right? It's nonsense, BS. It's not a substitute, guys, for real science, art, literature, journalism, truth, intellect. No, it's not. It's not. And you can see that in America, right? America's have all the tech in the world, hasn't prevented their society from imploding, right? So the real mantle of civilizational leadership is already shifting to Europe and Canada. They're seizing the moment, and I think that's a shift that's long overdue. Because that old world system, it could not have worked out. Okay? By design, it couldn't have worked out. When you have a country that says, I'm going to be the hegemon of the world, and I'm going to take 80% of the world's stuff and consume it, instead of investing seriously in its future, and consume it in very narrow-minded, materialistic ways, right? Like McMansions and big cars, all the stuff that Americans are notorious for, right? I mean, it's true. It's not like it's not true, right? To consume it in incredibly shallow and kind of superficial and short-term ways. It's a world system that can't work out. World system that works needs to be based on investment, needs to be based on long-term thinking. It needs to be based on reciprocity, equality, and mutuality between the members of the system. Okay? So that's kind of how we ended up in this bleak and dystopian future. That was a very abstract discussion. I don't think I really did it justice, by the way. I think that I should have done better. Maybe next time we'll get into like how dystopian this really is, because it is dystopian, guys. It's terrible, right? None of us should be living through this. It's traumatic every day. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed that. I just wanted to riff a little bit. Maybe I'm a little bit tired of writing this stuff down for you guys in these impenetrable essays. I don't know. Thank you for listening. If you have comments, you want me to answer some questions, make a video about a certain topic, just say so below. Okay? Thank you. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.